48-hour art check, round 153, most likely.
Yes.
Kind of lost track there. We should have just added 10.
I love it.
Oh, man. So we are here. Here we are.
Yes, we were joking before recording that we should have started like at a later number and worked our way backwards to where episode 1 would be joined by a character that's like, Misa, so happy to be on here. And you're like, wait, what's going on? And I don't like this episode 1. It doesn't feel authentic to the later ones.
This feels weird and oddly racist. I don't really know what's going on.
And what's with all the CG on this episode?
Right.
Everything's shiny.
Oh, man. I mean, if we started high enough, by the time we got there, we could have like access to really cheap CG, I feel like.
It's totally true.
What was I looking at? There was an app that's on Humble Bundle right now that you can buy, and it just tracks your face and animates a character. So like we could just be fully CG characters. It seemed to be mostly animals, so I'm not up on the furry community. So I don't feel like
we'll have to save that for our furry channel.
Right.
So.
Our secret furry channel that nobody knows about.
Exactly.
Sometimes I wonder how many people. I just want to know how many people actually are never really sure when we're kidding or not.
Oh.
So, all right, let's jump in. I'm excited about today's topic. So.
Me too.
Scott, what have you done in the last little while?
So, not as much as usual. I've been doing I did a couple live streams, and I'm doing it sort of in a unique way where, and actually, Cory, you helped me out with this, so thank you. But I pre-record an intro and an outro, and I actually pre-record the actual drawing portion, and I just string it all together. I speed it up a little bit so it doesn't take forever, the drawing portion. And then I just kind of let it play. So there's audio when I'm doing the intro and the outro, and then there's really no sound other than just a real quiet background noise. And then once it gets to the point where the drawing is, then I go on live and I interact with the chat. So, and I kind of like the format because it gives me a chance to talk to actually look at the chat. Because when I'm doing a live drawing, it's just, you got to concentrate on that. You don't get to see the chat as much. So I did one last week and I did one today. Partially, I didn't really want to do 2 in a row because I don't want that to be, that's not like the new format, but I do want to do more of these. But I actually went out of town this weekend, so I didn't really have time to edit a video. So
yeah.
So anyway, so that was kind of cool. And actually, I got my first couple super chats. So that's the first time. So that was kind of cool. So there's that. And then today I've been doing something I've been talking about getting back to for a while, and that is the Comic Pro Toolkit, or whatever I'm going to call it. It's basically the deluxe version of the Comic Maker Starter Kit, paid version, and I'm doing some brushes. I'm trying to duplicate the Photoshop brushes that I did, but do them in Clip Studio. So this new pack will have Clip Studio brushes. So
awesome.
Still trying to work on that, but
awesome. And while you're working on that, like if I wanted to, like throw my hard-earned cash down to get like a really cool starter kit for a comic book, like how much would that cost me?
Well, the starter kit won't cost you anything. Starter kit is totally free. You just go to circworks.com and click on. There's a couple links there. Just click on that. It'll say, "Do you want to make comics?" Or I forgot exactly what it says, but if you click on that, you just sign up for the mailing list, and you automatically get the starter kit. And it's got brushes and fonts and templates and all kinds of cool stuff.
Yeah, and you give other things, free advice, free items, like really great informational newsletters and stuff too. So,
that comes along with the mailing list. So yeah,
cool.
Yep.
All right, so
Josh,
should I jump in?
Yeah.
I got the page done, and I'm kind of surprised that I got it done because it's been a really eventful weekend. So I did manage to do the rest of the page. So I hit the mark of what I was hoping to do, and what I'm planning on doing tomorrow is scanning and well, I'll get into that in plans. I'm jumping ahead. But yeah, it's kind of exciting because I feel like it's getting closer to done, which is also filling me with existential dread as well. So,
and I feel like you're one of the few people who understands what that means. So that's good to know. We've got Victor and Matt in the chats, and Victor says that page looks cool. So, and
thank you.
I agree. That page does look cool. I have recently run into several people who are watching this show live and not commenting in the chat, and you should just at least say hi so that we know that you're there. So
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, if you're lurking, no problem with that. I mean, you're free to lurk, but
yeah, it's fine.
Join us, say hi. We like talking to people. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I have this. This is what I got done. Most people have been watching this show. I've seen me talk about this for a while. So this is Scott Serkland, who's on right now with us, designed this character and drew a bunch of the angles. And so we collaborated on this. And it took me way longer to rig it than I thought it would. But oh my gosh, that paid off so well because I probably spent over a week rigging this thing, like the eyes and the head and the ears and the hat. The hat was a nightmare. And then each individual finger and the hand turning in 3D space, and then the tire from several angles, and on and on and on. And then I went to animate it, and I was like, I probably knocked it out in like 8 hours.
Really?
Nice.
And it was because, after I had done all the prep work, basically, it was longer than 8 hours, but it was basically like a couple days. But I mean, one of them was a Saturday, so that was a bit of a marathon day. But once I did all the rigging, like it went fast, like actually to the point where, and I'll talk about this during plans, but I'm actually thinking I might, if I spent some time rigging all of the characters in my animated short, I think I could finish that really quickly.
Wow.
Whereas before I was thinking it would take me a couple of years to do that. Now I think I could do it like in maybe like 4 to 6 months. I could probably knock that out.
Amazing.
So anyway, it turned out pretty good. I'm kind of excited about it. So
yeah, that I wonder if that's like why they do so much rigging style animation, for film, because it anyhow, it's just, to me, it's really cool because if you guys have I don't know how much of it you've shared, but it's like you can move and because of these things you programmed in there, like like a finger will move and another finger will correspond with it, and all the movements are kind of like adaptive with like one little like swipe of movement. That's really cool what you've done. Like I think it's really exciting, and
thanks.
I'd love to see that. I was blown away when you texted that over the weekend, and I was just like, wow, like that just looks yeah. I mean, it's just kind of amazing. Yes.
Yeah, it was fun, and I'll tell you, like working with the character that Scott designed is awesome because I mean. He did several things that I would have done way differently just because of different styles and stuff, and I just love how it turned out. It was really cool. I like working on my own stuff, but I also like collaborating with like really talented people, and so it was a super fun project. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, and I just want to say, if it didn't come across in the messenger after Cory sent it, you just did an amazing job. I mean, especially like. The budget that we were working with, and partially that's Cory because he's the one that defined what he was going to do it for. But I don't know once he started doing it if he started to regret that. But yeah, they're getting quite an amazing piece of animation. So it really came out great. And so far I presented it to the client. I haven't heard back so my contact said she loved it, but she's got to show it to her boss, so we're still waiting back on that. I guess he's out of town, but I was hoping we hear back. So hopefully the fact that we haven't heard back isn't like a bad thing that he's going to come back with a lot of changes. But yeah, I don't know. It looks amazing. So
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun. So, and this is, we can talk about this during plans, but I think it'd be appropriate here. Scott is going to do a video talking about kind of the process. I think is what you're planning on doing, of like how we created this, and so I'll be kind of talking through that, and then Scott's gonna kind of put that together, and then I'm gonna be doing a series of videos about what I learned on the different plugins, because I'm using After Effects and I'm using 3 different plugins like integrated with each other. And several of them, I think I'm using them in a way that I at least haven't seen any other tutorials that anybody's using them like this. So I think it'll be kind of interesting. So if you're interested in kind of like learning how like 2 pros collaborate on something like this, like that'll be an interesting video to watch. And then if you want to know how to actually do it, I'm hoping that those will be kind of a series of interesting videos as well, because I'm just going to go through. You know, it's the basic thing. It's like the same thing every time. I try to get students to do this all the time. They always fight me on it, and then like it just works so well. Just like sketch it out, do storyboards, like talk about objectives before you get started with anything. Have a creative brief, like understand what you're doing. Like there's just a series of steps, and like this is a pretty tight turnaround. And I mean, just because like Scott and I know what we're doing and we work well together and we're communicating, it wasn't without its problems. There were several like fairly major hiccups. And, you know, like I would just go to Scott and say, hey, this is an issue. And then we'd talk it out or fix it or go to the client. And it was just like, it's just like a normal, but it was like a normal process. But I think a lot of people who aren't used to that type of process, you know, could have gone differently. But it's like I try to get students to do this all the time. It's like, just go through the steps that I'm telling you. This isn't busy work. It's not homework. This is just how the professionals do it. It's just how it's done for reasons that are beyond your comprehension right now. Just trust me, but they can't. They just need to get burned a few times, you know, and then they believe you later. But I don't know.
Yeah. You skip some of those key early steps, and then 10 years later, when you're working on something you could have finished in a month,
right?
You're kind of going to be regretting missing those early steps.
Yeah.
Just some of the touches you guys did, like I remember one of the iterations I saw, there was like some hat movement stuff that was a little awkward. And now there's like a little hat tip at the end with like a wink or a blink, but the timing's really nice. The character is great. Like I love the way the eyes were designed as light in there is so clever and cool, and that probably wouldn't have been where I went, and yet that's such a cool it's a cool solution, and it's I don't know, it's really fun. It's neat to see you guys combine your powers. It's fun to see.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about, is like the character design is just top notch. I mean, it's just awesome. Victor suggested that the video should be called 2 Pros and a Robot, which I feel like is an excellent video, and now I'm going to turn it into a pilot for the new series that I'm going to release on CW. So, just kidding.
I love it.
So anyway, sorry, I didn't want to take a really long time on that, but I'm excited about it, and I thought it turned out well. So.
Yeah, and I think every once in a while when we're doing the art checks, there are occasionally these really big projects that we finish, and of course we're going to go along about them because we're excited to see it done, you know?
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Cool. So, Scott, what are some challenges?
Nothing major. I mean, I was like I said, I kind of was out of town. I went up to Flagstaff, so I wasn't, you know, doing a whole lot of work, but that was by design. You know, it's kind of my choice. Yeah. So coming back, kind of getting back in the swing of things, and also because I've been away from this this starter kit, whatever you want to call it, project for so long, it's like, oh, how do I make brushes in Photoshop, or especially how do I duplicate the kind of brush that I did in Photoshop in a whole different software? And it's not going to be that close, but there'll be something similar, I guess.
Yeah.
So
cool. Josh, how about you? Wrong button.
Challenges. Playing 2 rock shows, one being an all-day event with a lot of free booze, and uh, being a dad and an art director, and then also managing to do my projects was a very big challenge this weekend. And I'm feeling it. I'm pretty exhausted. I was smart enough, I think, to take the day off because I was like, I also like, the thing is, I don't like not seeing my kid, and I didn't get to see him much this weekend, so it gave me a day to kind of hang out with my kid.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which is like super important. So that was one of the biggest challenges I'd say this week, was just like rolling with it, having fun, and at the same time like getting stuff done. It's weird, but doable.
Yeah. Mine are kind of similar. My wife is still doing a play, and they opened on Thursday or Friday, and so Saturday she did 2 or 3 shows. She did like a matinee. Anyway, and it's like an hour and a half away, and then I had this project that I wanted to get done, and I didn't know how long it was going to take me, and so it was some weird juggling because I had my son. He's almost a year, but like, starting to roll. He's not really crawling, but like he likes to pull the cat's hair, and the cat likes to try to swipe at him because of that. And so like you can't like just leave him, and he's mobile. And so like, and then my
So kind of
daughter's
roll.
he just rolls. He rolls really fast. I mean, he can cross the room in a couple seconds. He just doesn't move forward. And he gets like stuck under the couch because he can go backwards and he can go sideways, but then he just like jams himself under the couch and then is like can't do anything. Anyway, but so I had him, but he's like old enough to where he's not in that stage where you can just kind of put him in a bouncer and like you gotta So
Yeah.
so I'm like trying to work during naps and like drop my daughter off at a play date, and so like and I've got my motorcycle, which makes it challenging, and then my wife is out of town, and so just lots of like parental juggling has been going on lately with that, and it's been fun. I mean, like I got to pick my daughter up from like summer camp today, and I just think it like if I'm looking at it from a 9-year-old's perspective, I think it'd be cool to have like my dad like roll up in like leathers on a Harley to like pick you up from like the thing while everybody else is like getting loaded into a minivan, and then you throw on a helmet and just blaze off. Anyway, stuff like that is kind of fun. But yeah, just weird time consuming challenges. TJ is suggesting that I just start Maddox in a jammed position like a door jam. And that's very tempting sometimes when I want to get some stuff done, and it's just like, here, I'm just gonna start you backed into this under the couch. You can just stay there. Give him a cracker and he'll be good for an hour. It takes him about half an hour to eat a saltine because he can't figure out which way to turn it. So anyway, I'm going way too long today. Sorry, I'll stop talking. How about plans, Scott?
Plans. Well, a lot of it kind of depends. This client that we're working with, when they come back and because I think they're going to want to move on to the next thing. But I want to continue working on this starter kit and or whatever I'm going to call it, and the website. So that's kind of my plans. I'm going to try to get as much of that done as I can.
Cool. Josh?
So I am definitely going to try to have the next page thumbnailed and this page scanned and pieced together and up on quarterlystories.com. So tomorrow night I should have that up. I'd also like to do a blog post. And at some point I'd like to upload the footage from the first show, the all-day event thing. It was kind of fun. So
Cool.
It'd be cool to, like, I had a friend film it, and so I should throw it up shortly. I might throw the whole thing up on YouTube and just let people watch it if they're interested. Yeah, and then just trying to get further and thumbnail that thing. Hopefully get feedback from a client too. I have a client who's gone like a week and a half without feedback, and that should be a topic at some point.
Right? Yeah. When do you reach out?
Pending feedback gap when you're freelancing, it can be problematic.
Yeah, because like Scott said, it's a little hard to plan ahead when you're like waiting, and then
Exactly.
at any moment you're like it's gonna be like go 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 go. Anyway, yeah. So yeah. So for me, I at some point am gonna get paid for this cool animation that we did, and so I've got to start picking out some comic book pages because this money is not slotted for anything because we got out of debt a week and a half ago. So, yeah. So I'm probably gonna pick out some pages, and then I'm gonna jump back into. I'm gonna while I'm kind of hot on this. I'm gonna rig a few of my characters with the new plugins so that they're easier to animate with, and then. I've been talking about coloring some pages. I'm probably not going to get to that in the next 48 hours. And then the other thing is I want to edit some of the stuff. Some people think it's like really altruistic that I make all these tutorials on stuff, but really like what happens, I was just talking to somebody who does the same thing. It's like I have to make this tutorial because like a year from now I'm going to need to know how to do this thing and I'm old and I forget. And so I can be like, I know I made a video, and then I watch the video and I'm like, oh yeah, now I remember how to do that. But like
Thank you, me.
Right, I'm like offloading. It's like offloading my memory into the cloud, so I have a tutorial to show me how to do stuff. Like I have students come to me and they say, "How do you do this?" And I'm like, "I used to know how to do that, and I'm sure I made a video. So let's look." And like, "Oh, look, I did make a video. So let's learn together because I've completely forgotten."
That's actually a good piece of advice in there too, hidden in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, should we jump into the topic?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I got excited about today's topic because we were having a little chat beforehand. And we'll probably stay away from the trigger of that. But I do like this because earlier today it came up, and I think it's good for it's good to kind of process this. And I'm super curious on what Josh and Scott have to say about it because I think everybody's experience is different, and I think everybody's mileage varies as far as what their red flags are and what their variables are. So today's topic is sunk costs. So I am terrible at math, but I really enjoy economic theory. And I know this sounds like the worst episode of a podcast ever, but just stick with me because this is really fun because this applies to creativity like significantly. One of the things that I like talking about is opportunity costs. Like, the cost of something is the next most valuable thing that you would have done. So, for example, the cost of, doing my project is, not doing somebody else's project or something, right? But but sunk costs is different. Sunk costs are things that you have invested in something that you can't get back. And so I like to think of it as like, like let's say that the King of Spain puts a bunch of gold onto a treasure galleon, and pirates sink it, right? And you have to look at that and you have to say, okay, I have invested X amount of money, and it's now sunk. Literally, it's at the bottom of the ocean, right? And so you have to, at that point in time, decide how much is worth going after that. And so if you're going to lose 3 people's life and spend, $1,000 getting it back, that might be worth it because the risk to reward ratio is significant. But if you're going to lose hundreds of men and, millions of dollars going after it with no guarantee of getting it back, then you don't then that's the risk to reward doesn't make sense. And so sunk cost means this. We often will put a significant amount of time or money or effort or resources or whatever you want to say into something, and we think that that adds value to that thing, but those costs are sunk. They're in the past, and you have to evaluate the thing today. And so this is where like the phrase like fish or cut bait comes in. I don't fish. I think it's horrifically boring, but a lot of times in a project, you have to see, whether or not this layout is worth pursuing, or whether or not this pose is worth, or even the whole project. Like at some point in time you have to look at it and say, is this project going to yield fruit with more investment, or am I just going to be flushing more money down the toilet? So from a venture capitalist standpoint, let's say that you have company A and company B, and this is how I explained it today in class. Company A and company B. Company A, you give them $1,000. Company B, you give them $1,000. Company B turns a profit of $2,000. So now you have $1,000 that you're net positive. Company A comes to you and says, I need more money. So you give them $3,000. So now you're in the hole $4,000. You give company B $3,000. So you've given both companies the same amount of money, but company B continues to return with profits. And so it makes sense to continue to put money into company B, right? But at some point in time, after you're $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 into the hole in company A, you have to say, okay, even though I've invested a significant amount of money into this thing, is it worth it to continue to do that? It might be, right? You might look at that and say, I think there's actual potential here and this is a long tail game. Or I think I'm actually going to just say, you know what? I'm going to cut this off. I'm going to cut my losses. And that's what the sunk cost is you cut your losses and you say, I'm just going to cut this off. And I'm going to say, I gave it a shot. I'm going to move on. And then you can go and you can put money into company C. Yeah. And company C can really start doing it. And so when this comes to projects or creative endeavors, I think it's really interesting because if you look at it, you say, is this thing that isn't yielding a reward yet going to, or do I need to look at it and do it? And if you look at that emotionally, then you're going to view those sunk costs as value. And if you look at it logically, then you're going to view those sunk costs as things that are irrelevant to your decision because they're in the past and they don't matter. Yep.
It's funny. There's so much that comes to mind with what you're talking about, both creatively and just from a business standpoint. I will say you can see this very thing in action at a casino. It's kind of what they run on.
Yeah.
Where it's like people will get kind of baited into throwing more and more money because they've lost so much money. They feel compelled to win it back.
Right.
And so it's like, that's what keeps people at the table. That's what keeps people who like, maybe they almost recoup to double down on a bet because they're just dreaming of the time where they'll go back to zero.
Yeah.
And that's like a fool's errand a lot of the time. Not always, but quite a lot of the time. So I think that is definitely a good thing to bring up. I'm not quite sure where to go with it.
I'll give you a quick example. I, in 2012, decided that I was going to start drawing, and I gave myself 10 years. I said, I'm going to put a significant amount of effort into this. And if 10 years from now, if I'm not happy with where I am, no matter what's going on or what I've done, I'm going to cut it off and try something else.
Yeah.
And so that would be kind of like planning ahead, because if 10 years down the road, I don't think I like where I'm at and I like where I'm going. Right. But let's say that I was doing this and I just was terrible and I hated it. I didn't like how it felt and I didn't like the results that I was getting. I could go 10 years into this and say, but I'm already 10 years into it. And I could waste another 20 years of my life. Or I could say, actually, I hate this and I'm going to do something else. And it kind of depends on how you view that, like it's like in existentialism, the idea of facticity. The facts exist, but you get to assign the value to them.
Yep.
So here's my question. I'll ask you too, because I've had this experience with a comic. What are some factors in when you decide to kill a project? What are some things that trigger to you that you need to consider whether or not you're going to continue with something?
Time, money, how much time you've invested, and like you said, are you gonna be able to get that back, or I guess. I mean, it's kind of how you outlined it. One thing that not necessarily a project, and I don't know if this falls in the same category. You'll have to tell me, Cory. What about say you do a project for a client? The client decide, even you've got a contract and everything. It's pretty ironclad. It spells out that you're going to get this or whatever. And at a certain point, if the work that I put into it reaches a certain point, then it says in the contract that you have to pay in full, even if you decide not to do it, which to me sounds, I mean, even if you decide not to use that final piece, which to me makes perfect sense. But anyway, so this is a situation I'm in right now where I was doing a logo design, and and I've got the emails that say, "Oh, this looks great. We're they're all happy with it and everything." And then something happened, whether they showed it to a committee or something, and they wanted to go in a different direction, and so they just kind of cut off contact. So, so I just recently sent out an invoice saying, I don't know what's going on. I haven't heard anything, but I just want to close this project out. I said, because it's very near the end, I said, if you guys want to continue and finish this up, I'm more than happy to do that. But otherwise, this is what you owe me. And of course, I sent that out, and that was just today. I haven't heard back. I don't know that I will. So is this kind of what you're talking about as far as, does it make sense for me to go after this client for what they owe me, which is probably about $400, to go to like a small claims court? Is it worth my time to do that? Or also the other thing is the principle of it.
Yeah.
Just the fact that I just don't like the fact that people just take advantage of artists, and they just, think, oh, well, he'll do all the work, but if we don't want to use it, then we don't have to pay for it.
There are two questions I'd ask you. Are they local? Would be one.
Yes, they are local.
Okay, so that makes the court more feasible.
Yeah.
Because you can do small claims for like relatively close to nothing, and probably win, especially if you have like,
yeah,
it wouldn't even matter if they're represented. So
yeah,
in that case, like, just to me, measuring the cost, it's like, just get your money. If it's like a headache and it's not worth it, like if that were out of state and it's $400, like,
yeah, right.
I think that would be worth it, because once again, the amount wouldn't be enough to go outside of small claims, and small claims you only really works best if it's local. With state, because then you'd have to go to the state that the person lives in, file there, stay there until the court date. Like, it's just a headache. So I think the fact that they're local, yeah, you should totally. That's my opinion. I'm not I have no issue with, like, if you're a business and you didn't get paid, you should definitely. I mean, litigation like that. I know a lot of people criticize our country for being litigious, but part of the litigious nature of the U.S. is why there's such a thriving free market. So, like, I think, I think back it up, man. Like,
and it could probably be they'll ignore me until whatever they do, if they serve. I don't know how you do small claims, if they're served or whatever, and then they'll probably be like, this isn't worth my time to go to court, and then maybe they'll pay. I don't know. I mean, that could happen. But
right.
Again, Cory, I don't know. Does that fall into this category? Is that something?
Parts of it do. So you're actually talking about risk-reward ratio,
okay.
and so what you're trying to decide is for future stuff. So sunk cost is talking about the past. So the way that you're thinking about this, I think, is appropriate, because you're thinking, is this worth my time in the future? Not, I've invested this much time into it, and that gives it, the time that you've invested thus far is sunk. It's gone, right? And so you can't get it back. You can't recoup it. And so now you're looking at, today this is where I stand. On my P&L, my profit and loss sheet, right? I have somebody that owes me $400. It's going to cost me resources. It's going to cost you time and money. And you just have to, for yourself, decide, for the time and money, is it worth doing certain actions? And it might not be worth going to court because of the time. Like, you might be able to make more money in the 3 hours that it's going to take you to, or 6 hours or whatever, to prep, drive there, wait, sit in court or whatever. But it might be worth it to go get a pro bono lawyer through the Graphic Artists Guild to send a letter that just basically has legal stuff on it that says, this will happen, or I'm going to take you to court, because the amount of time and money that it would take to do that is less, and the reward is pretty high. For them on their side, they're going to look at this and they're going to say, I've sunk X amount of money into this, and is it worth my time to go after whatever? A really interesting thing that's happening right now is VidAngel versus Disney. And both sides are looking at this, and I think Disney is looking at it and saying, VidAngel is claiming we have made Disney about $250,000 in profits that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And they are going after us for X amount. And anyway, both sides are looking at this and saying, for what I want out of this situation, how much am I willing to risk versus what I could possibly gain out of that. And so that's risk reward. But sunk cost is if you were to say something along the lines of, I've put so much effort into this that I've got to chase this down no matter what, right? At some point in time, you need to look at that and say,
no return type situation.
Say that again.
Is it kind of like a point of no return type situation?
Yeah, I think I can jump in to try to help, because I think I'm getting it. The gist of it is like, let's say you start a comic or something, and you're where I'm at with the comic. You're like 5 years in, and you're not seeing the quality of work you want. You're not really necessarily seeing a reward at the end of the tunnel. You're like, I don't think it's going to get published. I don't particularly like it. Then at some point you might actually just step back and go, maybe this is a project that's just sunk. Like maybe that time, those 4 years are just, which by the way is like, it's a great topic to bring up, because it's a really hard balance with comics and animation and creative work, because it's so time. It's the income that you're spending on, especially personal projects, is a lot of time. And you can end up in a situation where you are like knee deep in a loss.
Yeah.
And like, and you got to kind of decide as a creative what that loss is. Like for me, what I'm working on, I've invested like 5 or so years on, and I think it's worth it. And I've actually come to the conclusion, I think it's worth it regardless of whether it gets a publisher or whether it makes $1.
Right.
And part of why I even approached it the way I did was because I was getting work that was making money, and I wasn't getting a lot of fulfillment from that. Like, and so I was like, I want to have something that I can be personally proud of, like that I can know is good. And that's a tough thing, because when you're in the creative process, even if that's your driving factor, then you still are going to have all these moments of doubt that inevitably happen on a massive project. And with comics and animation and stuff like that, they're so time consuming that it is something to consider when you're working on. But it's a hard balance, right? Because how much of that is just resistance and doubt, which is part of the process. And then some of it might just be truth. Like I've been in scenarios where I've been really years deep into a project, and all these gut feelings were hitting me the whole time. Like this part's weak. This is weak. There's too many talking heads. There's too much of this stuff. And I would just go, well, that's just doubt. And it's, and then in retrospect, actually all of those gut feelings were dead on. Like, like it had major plot holes. It had too many talking heads. It had like some major flaws with it. It had some strengths, but it might have been a good project to cut my losses on earlier, although I learned a lot of value from it.
Sure.
So, but I get, is that kind of, I don't know if
no, absolutely. Cause I have the mixed, right? I was 60 pages into the mixed. This is what I used to learn to draw. It's my first comic. And of course, cause I'm an idiot, I wasn't like, let's take on something manageable and do an issue. I was like, oh yeah, I've got this giant, expansive, epic world building thing. And I took 18 months to get 60 pages into it, full color and everything. And at the end of that second chapter, I looked at it and I looked at my story and I said, I'm like a fifth of the way through this. And so I was really an inefficient storyteller at the time because I was new. And then two, I was like, well, I have to get my master's, and so I have to make a choice. But when I was done with my master's, my intention was to go back and do the next chapter of the mixed. I still love that story, but the fact of the matter is, I hate the first half of what I produced because I was bad.
Yeah.
I was learning, like everything you're talking about, talking heads and exposition. I mean, there were characters that just did exposition for like 3 or 4 pages, so much that as I was drawing it, I got bored and just had them attacked just to interrupt them. I was just like, this is so boring that I just want a fight scene here because or whatever. And so I looked at that and I said, if I'm being honest, I need to do one of two things to this story. I need to either start from scratch, or just never go back to it because I can't in good faith continue on this one, no matter how much time I spent in it. And I calculated the hours at one point in time, and it was a ridiculous amount of time.
Yeah.
But it's an unfinished story. And it goes nowhere. and anyway, but the fact of the matter is, because I was able to just say, I'm going to cut my losses on this. I'm going to put this to bed. I'm not going to think about it anymore. I rewrote it. So I have that on the shelf. If I ever want to go back to it, I have a really good way of telling that story. But I mean, since then I've learned animation. I've done a children's book. I've done several short stories. I've done a ton that is way more valuable to me in the last several years than 2 more chapters of a subpar kind of crappy like limp along project that I was learning on. I was cutting my teeth on it, and so kind of that there's kind of just the two sides of it. Like if you go off of sunk costs. Then you can fixate on something that isn't good because of how much you've spent on it.
Yeah.
But if you go off of risk reward, then you can look at it like I look at your book and I say, you've got 4 pages left. I would say no matter how you feel about it, the risk reward is worth working on it to get those 4 pages done. The fact that you feel really good about it is great because I mean you should, right? It's a good book. But I mean, for me, I looked at it and I said, I've got 300 pages left, and the story sucks and it's not going anywhere. so the art was terrible and I bailed on it.
That's actually a really hard conclusion to come to because when you're working on personal projects, they're very personal. So obviously it's something you're very drawn to. And I think that's where it's really important to have objectivity when you're working on these things. But it is a balance because there is also something to be said for, I think sometimes even finishing like a terrible project in comics. I almost think it's necessary. Like I feel like the graphic novel that I finished before this one enabled me to actually do this one. And the fact that I had finished it has given me encouragement through times where I'm like, can I even finish a because there's that happens too, where you're like, but I also, I do meet people sometimes that are really locked into something that is completely going to be a loss.
Yeah.
And it's clear as day to almost everyone except the person doing it. And in scenarios like that, it's very hard because it's like you can't really tell people what to do with their time or their lives. But it is hard to watch sometimes because it's a fine line. It's like there is a culture of delusion in art too. And I don't know. So it's hard. It's a hard one to balance. Like for me, what's an interesting question is how do you know when you're on a project that's a sunk cost that you should abandon ship on, or if you're on like, Bone by Jeff Smith, like Jeff Smith, like if you look at the first iterations of Bone, they were like, not as beautifully drawn. He was working on them when he was a teenager. The story was kind of insane at first, and then it got all polished and beautiful. But it's like, I would hate if Jeff Smith had just been like, oh, this is a sunk,
Right.
So,
but I mean, the fact that he had early iterations means that at some point in time he said, this iteration isn't working, I'm going to start over.
Yeah, yeah. But like what I'm getting at is because I'm imagining, like our whole, like a lot of people who watch the show and stuff are people working on personal comics, particular projects, particularly comics
Yeah.
or animation. And in those cases, like, what's your barometer? Because I like mine, I think I have an idea about. I'm still kind of cooking it, um, but what's your barometer to know whether like you're halfway through a pursuit that should be dropped, or whether you're halfway through a pursuit and you're just facing resistance? Like where do you draw that? That's a hard one.
Yeah, that's a super tough question, and I think that's why I wanted to have this discussion is because I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, and so I'd like to throw that out to the chat. Like, how do you
Yeah.
guys tell? And I'll talk through this, and I'm sure Scott will jump in. How do you tell the difference between just normal resistance, which is that inner critic in your mind that just tells you that nothing is worth it and that you should just go play video games and not try to, make something, or the imposter syndrome that just tells you that you're bad and everybody else is good and, you're never going to finish this anyway. And if you do, it doesn't matter. How do you tell the difference between that and your real instinct telling you there's better stuff out there for you than this, you know? And so that's kind of a question for the chat. For me, I look at I don't put money into things because it's all effort. So for me, it's time. Hours and weeks don't matter to me that much. So what I look at is I look at things in months, and if I look at something and I'm not enjoying it, or it's super hard, and it's not potentially gonna do anything for me or achieve any particular goals. Like, let's say that something is super hard, but at the end and I'm not enjoying it. It's a struggle. It's a slog the whole time. But at the end of it, I know. Like, this animation is a really good example for that. I didn't enjoy doing that, but man, I am basking right now in what I was able to accomplish. I learned a ton. It looks great. I feel really good about it.
Yeah.
But I was exhausted. That animation beat the crap out of me. So if I were to look
Yeah.
at a snapshot of that and say, this isn't fun, quote unquote fun, I'm not enjoying myself,
Yeah.
I would have just, well, I wouldn't have quit because I was contracted and I have integrity. But if it was an unpaid thing, and I saw that that was going to last for 5 years, I might go,
Yeah.
I don't know. But what I did is I looked at this and I said, no, this is something I want proof that I can do this. In my mind, I know I can do it, but I don't have anything in my portfolio that says that I can do it. And I want to get to a certain level. And this is going to be another step in that staircase of getting me to that level. To me, that's worth it. So if the project is going to help me meet some goals, help me level up some skills or some knowledge, or produce something that I'm going to be really proud of, and this one checked all three of those boxes, then it doesn't matter whether I'm enjoying it or not.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put in the time. The other thing is, I'm 39, and so, and this is probably a morbid way of looking at things, but I don't have an infinite amount of time on this earth. If I live to be 100, how many graphic novels or animations or short films can I finish before I die? And so everything that I look at is this something that is worth sacrificing potential years, to do? And I really only do projects where I feel like, yes, this is something that I'm willing to spend 6 months on. This is something that I'm willing to spend 18 months on. This is something I'm willing to spend 2 years on or whatever.
Yeah.
Because at the end of that, I will not have regretted spending that time. And so I try to look at it that way. So if I get 6 months into a project and I start to see that, like, I'm still years out, and the reward that I'm going to get from that or the value that I'm going to get out of that isn't going to match the amount of time that I have a limited amount of, then I cut it.
Yep. I
Um,
think that's great. That's Scott, do you have like a kind of a way to distinguish between like kind of a project that would be a loss where you're just like, I put a couple years into this, it's a loss, or a project that like is like just that's resistance, and it's just like, well, no, I put a couple years into this and I need to see it through. Like, how do you distinguish like that? It's an interesting question because I don't really know have a solid answer.
I purposely try not to take on long-term projects.
Yeah.
I like smaller projects where I can see the finish line and everything like that. Like I could never do like what you're doing. So, and that's like with Young and the Dead, that's why I do single issues, because if I said I was going to make a graphic novel, I just couldn't do it. So, because like right now I finished one and I haven't started the second one. I'm kind of like, I just need a little breather and I'll get to it when I'm ready. So I don't know if I've had a lot of that as far as that investment in time, but there is, and I don't know if this is the same thing, because I don't think it's a totally sunk cost, but one of the things I did sort of abandon was a children's book that I was writing, because it didn't really fit sort of where I was going with the brand as far as, robots, aliens, zombies. It was a different kind of theme and everything. So it just didn't fit in there. So I kind of, I say I put it in the back burner. I don't know if I'll ever go back to that. I don't think it's a totally sunk cost, because there's nothing saying I can't go back and pick up where I left off. The only thing is, and this might be an entirely different thing, is whether that story is relevant anymore. Because the whole idea of that story was, it was called What Every Kid Needs to Know About the Family Vacation. And it's basically just a very tongue-in-cheek, irreverent guide from a kid's perspective of what a family vacation is like. But back then, I was basing it on, kind of the vacation that I grew up with, and things to keep you occupied in the car. Now everyone's got tablets and video games. And so I watched my kid, like I just went to Flagstaff, it's like a 2.5 hour drive, or about 2 hour drive. Of course, my kids are on their phones and it's never like I'm bored, because I would be bored if all I was doing was just on my phone, but so it's different. I don't know if that would play to the modern kid. So I might have to abandon it because of that. But so that's one thing, and I don't know if it's the same reasonings for not continuing it.
Yeah.
But one thing that comes to mind, and I hope he doesn't mind that I mention this, but I remember, and I don't know how long you guys have been following, like Mike Emmerich. When I first discovered him, he was working on this big kind of stop motion project. Were you guys around when he was working on that?
Yeah,
remember that? Yeah,
I remember that.
Okay. So and again, Mike, if you're listening, hopefully you don't mind, and I don't want to bring up this bad thing, but the bad memories and everything. But he had invested a ton of time in developing this stop motion, and it was just going on, and and it came to a point where he's like, I just have to cut my losses on this thing and just tell the client, I just can't continue to do this. And I think if he wouldn't have done that, he probably wouldn't have been able to transition into comics, because he has said recently that he kind of had this 5-year plan where in that 5-year plan, he had to get professional work doing comics, or that was kind of like going to be the end. And he was able to do that. He's got a professional comic thing lined up. So in my situation, I don't know if anything applies, but I definitely can sympathize, and I see kind of the situation that he was in with that. So but that's one of the reasons why I try to really not take on like super long-term projects and everything.
Yeah. I'm really hesitant to get into to bed with anybody on like a long-term project, because I like, for instance, the thing that I know myself, and so like with quarterly stories, it's a really ambitious project. If that were a pitch of like a friend of mine, and I'd have to be stuck collaborating with that friend for like 5 years on a project, and also just having to balance feedback and stuff like that, I don't think I would have been able to see it through. I think one of the reasons it appeals to me having that long-term project is the idea of being able to have a full vision, a fully realized vision that has nothing to do with commerce. And like that to me is worth a long-term investment, because I think as artists, whether it's like small animations or even short comics or whatever, I think it's necessary for us as professionals to have that thing. that we're doing that's outside of commerce, that's just art. And I used to be really critical of that because I was like a young, hot-headed, like, you know, person who thought illustrators were actually the real artists and that artists were just fake illustrators. I used to take the counter, attack because, and by the way, this only exists really in academic circles. But like
Yeah.
when I was in art school, there was all this, antagonism of like fine art versus commercial art, and it was this whole thing, which I've rarely experienced in the real world. But in
But
academics,
boy, if there aren't lots of master's theses written on it.
yeah, yeah. And in academic circles, it's this giant thing. And so I was like, just the guy who was like, well, screw fine art. Commercial art is the art of the masses, and fine art is the art of the bourgeois. Like, and, um, but which I still kind of feel a little bit, but not as much and not as intensely. But one thing I have come to realize is like, I think regardless, whatever kind of artist you are, you're doing something to make a living. That might be doing commissioned paintings for rich families, and you still need to be doing your own paintings. Like if you don't do your own paintings, your commercial paintings are going to become dull and dead. At least for me, that's the thing. But I will say, like, the cool, like, so for me, when I analyze a project that's going to take a long time, it has to mean something. It has to really mean something. And so like being at this latter half of like something I've spent this many years on, I am starting to get this cool feeling of like, wow, I finally am going to get to show people this thing I've been building.
Yeah.
And it's a thing that like literally I couldn't have built in a short amount of time. And so it's like, that's a really exciting thing. Being at that latter half where I'm like, I feel like I have this like awesome thing that like is almost a secret, because I think at this point I've been showing a lot of updates that are like, here's a panel, and it's like years of that gets kind of old. But I think just being like, boom, here's a book,
Right.
that'd be pretty awesome. And I don't think you get to like, as a cartoonist, and I think like, like Scott, you're doing that in your own way with Young and the Dead. There is going to be a point where you have like a massive book out of this thing you've been doing in increments. And I do think this is one thing to be said, like for cartoonists. I think a lot of the time we're hesitant to want to do that, but then we go to conventions and we look at graphic novels and we feel this ache. Like, I need to be doing that. That's how it's done. It's years.
Yeah.
You throw in years, and then like you get your book that you can go thump. Like otherwise, like you can do short comics or you can do short projects and stuff like that. But those big epic projects take big epic amounts of time. It's like animated movies too. Like I don't think a lot of people are aware of like how many cogs and like how much money is spent to put something like Toy Story 4 that just came out.
Yeah.
That is a mass investment. And that's why it has that impact when people see it, because it's like it's this insane investment. But yeah, you want to measure it out. Like, is it worthwhile? Is it worthwhile to you? Like, is it like, is your story something that like if you didn't tell it, you'd be upset, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm reading a book right now, The Illusion of Life, which is two of the nine old men writing the history of Disney and like what Disney did to animation. It's a fascinating book. I'm not very far into it, but one of the things that's really interesting is they're describing Walt, and they're like, he was a terrible businessman. Like from an investment standpoint, like he didn't understand like how money worked as much as like a good businessman would, because his fixation, his focus, his drive in life was he wanted to entertain people.
Yeah.
And so they would go into these projects, and it paid off obviously for him, right? But I mean, he created this entire this entire series of characters and cartoon and everything, and lost his shirt on it because a business partner just ran off with the rights, and he lost the rights to him, and so he had to start over. And that's when he came up with Steamboat Willie and did kind of the first iteration of Alice in Wonderland, and he moved out to Hollywood to become a film producer. Like he wanted to make live action movies, but couldn't really bring himself to be able to tell the stories that were limited by the abilities of the day. And so he said, well, the only way I can tell these crazy stories is do it in animation. So then he hires all these animators. But the interesting thing about their process is that they did not operate with the sunk cost mindset. And so at any point in time in the process, somebody would come up with a good idea and they might lose months of work. They might cut minutes of animation. And they were saying, like, he listed a bunch of characters that didn't exist when they wrote the story. They're like, Jiminy Cricket was not in Pinocchio until really late into the process of the storytelling, and we had to redo a significant portion of that movie. And so it's interesting that it's not just quitting a project, it's also like, does this project get better, and then that gets into like the law of diminishing returns, which is another super fascinating thing that I've talked about on my channel a little bit. But it's basically like, if I do this again, or if I go redo this, or I continue to put effort towards this thing, I will get less return over time, right? But like if you cut your grass one way, that's great. You cross cut it, you're going to get pretty good. But typically people don't take a third pass at it because the return isn't worth it. But what Walt Disney did with his initial group of animators and storytellers and stuff is, if somebody had a good idea at any point in time in the process, it would be considered for the value that it had. And they would not take into account how much work they had already done. I don't believe that they're like that today. But back in the day, that's why they produced. I mean, if you look at the first few films that Disney made and you don't see absolute masterpieces, you're kidding yourself. And it's because they did not operate in a sunk cost fallacy mindset where it was like, well, we're already halfway through, so we can't do anything about it now. I know the story doesn't make any sense, and I know we've solved this problem on paper, but we're already this far into it. No, they would say, scrap that. Let's fix this problem. Let's do it. We've come up with a solution.
And I think you've actually, through that, kind of pointed out a good red flag, I think, to anyone working on their own projects or working on projects with teams or working on projects with artists you hired. If you ever catch yourself saying, yeah, but we've already
right.
we've already gotten this far, or, well, this is just the way things are done and we're this far in, like, that's usually, to me, that would be a big red flag that maybe there is like a thing that should be sunk in that process.
Yeah, I just thought of a good example. So when I was working at one of the game studios, there was a project going on. I wasn't part of this particular team. I was working on something else. But they were developing just, we were doing social games, but they were developing this game that was just pretty revolutionary for like a Facebook game. I mean, just the amount of this world, what it could do, and all these different battles and the characters, and there was just so much time and everything that was dropped, that was invested into this game. And every time they would show like little bits and pieces, I'm like, oh man, this is incredible, this is going to be great. And it just got to the point where they realized that it just was not, at least with the technology or whatever, it just couldn't be done. They couldn't do what they wanted to do. And it's just like all that work. And and they eventually, had to abandon it. And I didn't, there was talk in the beginning about, well, what can we do? Can we take some of these characters, some of these bits and pieces that we developed in here, and maybe do sort of a scaled down version? They were talking about all these different things, but nothing ever became of it. And I mean, all of that work is still sitting, I assume somebody still has it on a hard drive or whatever, but that was probably probably one of the major reasons why that company eventually folded. I mean, it kept going on for another year or two, but that plus other things, because in that business, you're only as good as your most, your current game or your most successful game. And, we had a couple really successful games, and fortunately the games that I was working on were some of the most successful. There's one that wasn't so much, but it was a smaller game, and unfortunately it was pretty much my idea, and I still think it was a great idea, but that one didn't catch on. But for the most part, I was kind of involved in some of these more successful games, but we had built these other games too, and they just didn't go anywhere. So, and this was a big part of it. I mean, but it was just incredible. And so it was just kind of like, I was like kind of bummed that it was hard for me to see all that work that went into that, and they couldn't make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of friends who work at Disney and talk about the archive room, and you'd be shocked. Like, there's immense amounts of scrapped projects, like beautiful animations, beautiful illustrations, beautiful rides that were designed and envisioned and never put into place in the parks. Like, but one thing that you mentioned that I think we need to pin for like a subject, maybe like the next Monday or something, is I do like that you were saying in the industry you're only as good as your latest project. I think that's a good topic for show, because I think that's all industries in art. Right? It's a dark part of it, but I think like any industry where there's commerce, it's like that seems to be. I think that would be a good topic.
Yeah.
I think with navigating it, you just really have to try to analyze if long term it's going to play out. Like if long term you see an advantage to it playing out, and whether that's monetary advantage, hopefully it's an advantage that's outside of just your ego. And I don't know, like, to me, I still do think it's a very gray thing, because resistance can be very convincing and sounding like a logical reason to avoid kind of doing the work, so it is a hard balance, and I don't want to encourage people too much to like get midway through a project and just be like, meh, because I do think in cartooning especially, it's a long game thing. But then again, there are some comics that I have seen out there where I'm like, maybe this is one that should just cut it and move to the next thing, that'll be better.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things along, and I think this is a good way to wrap it up. One is if you are deciding whether or not you should stop making stuff completely or not, that's resistance, right? But if you're deciding whether you're going to put your efforts into a different creation, that's a value judgment, right?
Yeah.
And assessment. But if you're like, well, should I give up or not? That's different than like, okay, I think I've got a couple good comics in me, or I think I've got a couple good animations in me, and this is getting in my way.
Yes.
There's that. But the other thing is, finishing things is significant. Even finishing bad things, even finishing something that could be significantly better, is way better than like having a personal archive room of hundreds of unfinished projects. You've done nothing. You've wasted your time. So there is kind of that balance. And then I just want to close with Victor's comment, because I think this is a really good comment. And I think this is difficult because I don't think there is a good answer, and I think there's huge risks in even going down this thought process. But I think there's also huge risks in not going down this thought process. So it's just a risky area. But Victor says, for me, I try to weigh in all of my options to determine whether it's worth my time, or should I look to do something else. A big determining factor has to be what the outcome of the project will benefit me. And so, and I think that's true. The idea here is that not that you're going to stop making stuff, and not that you're not going to finish things, but that you're going to finish the right things, and that you're going to try to recognize the wrong things early enough to where when you cut your losses, you don't lose that much. And one of the biggest deciding factors is do I think that this is a benefit? And if you're like Walt Disney, if it was entertaining, it was worth the time and money, right? And if it was, he didn't necessarily set out to do anything groundbreaking, but he did groundbreaking things because he was seeking a lofty goal of entertaining people, making people laugh, and Josh, you've got some very significant personal reasons to do quarterly stories, and I think if you were to say, this is hard, I'm going to quit, that's the wrong reason, right? But looking at it and saying, no, this is important to me, and so it doesn't matter whether it's hard or not, I'm going to finish it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Like tying it to the War of Art analogy that we always like to use, because I think we're obsessed with that book. It's great. If you guys haven't read it and you watch this show, you should read it.
It's like a 3-hour audiobook, so you could really just do it in an evening, and it'll kick your butt.
Yeah, but if you think about it like a war, like every time you're creating stuff, every time you're doing the act of creating something, especially like a personal project, you're going to face resistance, right? But you also want to kind of view it like you're at war with resistance. But like, what kind of fool in a war would advance to a battlefield where the tactics were changed by the other side and just continue on that path? Right? You do have to be adaptable, because if you do that, you're going to get ambushed. And like, that's kind of what we're talking about, is like, if you're on the wrong one, and meanwhile the battle's over here, like, it's better sometimes to cut your losses, reroute, and fight the right battle, and then you'll actually get some wins. I think that would be what I'd kind of chime in with for me.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts, Scott?
No, it's an interesting topic, something I never really gave much thought to, but now it's rolling around in my head. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I always find economic theories and investment theories to be really interesting, because a lot of creatives don't think with a business mind, and I think it can be really valuable. There's some value in there. There's also some garbage that is not worth even considering, and whatever. But yeah. So anyway, if you want to check out some of the stuff that we are working on, you can always go to my site, CoryKerr.com, and there'll be stuff there. You're on Josh's channel right now, so you can go to make sure you like this video, subscribe, hit that bell, share it, all that jazz, and go to JoshuaKemble.com. And Scott, our Monday guest, has lots of amazing stuff going on, and that stuff can be found at circworks.com, including getting a starter kit to get you started on your project that includes fonts and all types of different things to help you do comics, which is well worth it. So go make something awesome, and make sure it's the best awesome thing that you can make at the time, and then get better and make awesome stuff that's better than that. We'll see you guys in a couple days.
Love it.